Hero Time, Chapter 20, The Mind for It. Kevin did not age gracefully, though aging 80 years in about 2 seconds was bound to be hard on anyone. Jen was doing her best not to laugh, she really was, but Kevin trying to unlock a cactus with his car keys made her snort. Gwen shot her a dirty look, but Jen just took the keys. They would find a way to fix this. In the meantime, it was pretty funny watching old man Kevin flirt with Gwen and grouch at her. "I hope you know what you're doing," he grumbled from the back seat. Jen grinned at him in the rearview mirror. She started the car and spotted something in the side mirror. She swore and gunned the engine, throwing the car into reverse, slamming into a set of trash cans. "It's not a bumper car!" Then Gwen spotted what Jen had seen. "Drive faster!" Jen pulled the emergency brake and spun the car in a perfect handbrake turn, snapping the brake back off with a flick of the wrist. Kevin screamed from the back seat, and Jen tried her best to block him out as she raced away from the creature that was now following the car. "Wanna be street racer?" Kevin grumbled as the girls hauled him away from the now wrecked car. Well, aged. It was a mess of rust, and as Jen glanced behind her, the wheels creaked and the metal of the axle bent and snapped, the whole thing coming crashing to the ground. Jen flinched as Kevin glared at her. "You are never driving my car again." True. Gwen just managed to suppress her laughter. Jen shook her head and stiffened as she spotted the figure across the street from them. She leaned Kevin more firmly against Gwen and stepped in front of the other two. "Isn't that right, Paradox?" "You're late. You were supposed to be here 15 seconds ago. Or is this thing running fast again?" He closed a pocket watch and slipped it back into his pocket. Gwen frowned. "Who are you? What was that creature?" Paradox ignored her and eyed Kevin. "You look different. Did you do something to your hair?" Kevin's scoff turned into a cough about halfway through. "Yeah, I'm parting it down the middle now, and I also got real old." Paradox scoffed. "Don't talk to me about old. I walk in eternity." "You better start running in eternity," Kevin threatened as he waved a fist at Paradox from where he was still leaned against Gwen. Jen stayed between the two. "What do you mean?" Paradox stepped up to her and frowned. "You're a little different, too." Before any of them could do anything, Paradox took Jen's chin in his hand and moved her face to get a good look into her eyes. "Something in your eyes isn't there yet." He frowned and released her chin, looking back over her shoulder at Kevin. "But you might slow us down. I'll have to fix that. We'll come back right over there." With that, Jen blinked and Kevin and Paradox were gone. "Jen, what is he talking about?" Jen shook her head. "I don't know." They both glanced over their shoulders at the spot Paradox had pointed to as Kevin and Paradox came back around the corner, Kevin now back to his proper age. "He doesn't have a time machine. He has a map inside his head." Paradox grinned at her. "Very good, Jen. But you did always have the mind for time travel." Paradox looked into Jen's face again, searching for something. "You've been closer to time than any but myself. The last of her kind, and she used you to try and fix that. She won in the end. She walked along time itself, and you walked with her for a moment." Paradox frowned. "It's still not there, though." Jen glared. "What's not there?" "I can't say. I may not yet know. It's exciting not to know things, isn't it?" "You mean like how you don't know how to beat that creature?" Paradox frowned. "That one's more frustrating at the moment, really." "Take us back to the experiment." "I told you can't stop it from happening." "I know, just trust me." Paradox nodded, and the world around them flashed and changed. Jen took off without a second thought, Kevin and Gwen close behind her. Catching the assistant before he could go spinning off into the void was easy as Humongosaur. What she hadn't been expecting was what she saw looking into the swirling blue vortex. She stared. She only stopped staring when something grabbed her around the waist. She hadn't even noticed she'd transformed back, still holding on to the scientist, who was shaking. Gwen dragged her away from the event horizon and smashed the machine. The three of them escaped in the cloud of smoke that ensued. "How'd did you not realize he was your assistant? You had 1,000 years to figure it out. Paradox laughed at Jen's words as they vanished back to their present. Oh, that was fun. Would you like a gumball? Jen shook her head at Paradox, who shrugged and put them away. I must say, for your first time in the past, that wasn't bad. Kevin frowned. First time in the future, too. And on the moon, no less. Paradox laughed. Oh, Kevin, it wasn't their first time in the future. He grinned at Gwen and Jen, who shrugged at each other. He's not wrong. Gwen nodded. I know we went to the future, I just don't remember a whole lot of it. Kevin frowned. You went to the future, and you don't remember it? Paradox shrugged. Energy beings are beings of the present. Past and future never sit well with them. But Jen has the head for it. Jen tapped a finger to her lips. I was sworn to secrecy. Kevin frowned. By who? The only person she listens to on a regular basis, Gwen said, grinning. And who is that? Kevin asked, glancing at the redhead. Herself. Jen held up a hand at Gwen as her friends laughed. Wait, guys, where did Paradox go? Looking around, they saw that Jen was right. While they had joked, the lab coat-clad man had vanished, and this time had failed to reappear. Oh, yeah, thanks for stranding us out here, Kevin yelled. Kevin! Gwen tapped the taller boy on the shoulder and pointed behind him. He blinked and laughed loudly as he spotted what she had seen. My car! I take back everything I was about to say about you, Paradox. Jen laughed as Kevin and Gwen admired the car. Factory new, from 1976. Okay, I like him. He can stick around. Jen shook her head and pulled a sheet of paper out from underneath the windshield wiper. Kevin, please keep in mind that if this car makes contact with anything else from 1976, it will explode like antimatter. Better keep a close eye on the change you keep in here, Jen said as she stepped into the back seat. Kevin frowned. He's not serious, right? Gwen shrugged and got into the car. Kevin shook his head and got in as well. Gwen fell asleep about 10 minutes into the drive back to Bellwood. So, what was Paradox talking about? The last of their kind? Tried to use you to fix that? Sounds like some intense stuff. Jen nodded, fiddling absently with the dial on the Omnitrix. Back when I was 10, we ran across someone called Eon. She tried to use the Omnitrix to turn me into her, to open something called the Hands of Armageddon, to save her whole world. Kevin frowned. I mean, that doesn't sound so bad. Saving worlds is kinda your thing. Jen nodded. Yeah, but not at the expense of other worlds. Eon wanted to use Earth as a substitute for her world, to roll over everything and everyone here and replace it with her world. And she almost succeeded. Her DNA is still in the Omnitrix. Without Gwen, she'd have taken over. Jen flicked a finger across the dial as if brushing a speck of dust off of it. Yikes. Jen nodded. Yeah, we don't talk about it. We don't like talking about it. But why did you becoming Eon mean you walked along time itself, like Paradox said? Eon's race had mastered the ability to control time, like Paradox does. I was still in there when Eon took over for the time she managed to. I watched through her eyes. I think that's why time travel doesn't freak me out. I understood it when I was Eon, and it still makes sense to me now. Sort of like how I understand how to make fire as heat blast or swamp fire, but can't do it as a human. It's just something I understand. Does that make any sense? Kevin was silent for a moment. I mean, sort of. Not really, but kind of. Jen shrugged and went back to twiddling with the Omnitrix for the rest of the trip back to Bellwood. Chapter 21. Discussion. Kevin dropped Jen off at her house, which was empty. Her father was out of town on business and had taken her mother with him, so they could spend some time together as a couple. Jen didn't mind. She liked having some time alone. So when she unlocked the door, she didn't bother looking around too hard for anyone else. You have good taste in television. Jen whirled at the familiar voice. Paradox was sitting in an armchair, fiddling with a small blue box, a toy from a TV show Jen watched with her father as a kid. He tossed it to her, and she caught it easily, smiling at the small blue plastic box. Well, it runs in the family. Dad introduced me to this show. She set the box down on the table. But you're not here to discuss TV. Paradox shook his head. No, I'm not. I remember Gwen in the future saying something about not being allowed to remember what happened during that time because it could cause a paradox. Paradox laughed. Yes, well, as you told yourself then, that is just a possible future for you. Your path is your own to decide. Your futures are vast and variable. Gumball? He held out the bag, and Jen shrugged. Why not? She took a green one and popped it into her mouth. She chewed thoughtfully for a moment before she blew a bubble and frowned. There is one thing I don't understand. Paradox nodded for her to continue. The phone calls. That had to have been you the whole time. But how did you get a hold of Grandpa Max's phone? My dear Jennifer, I have no idea what you're talking about. Jen nodded, so she had told him how he got her to Los Soledad in the first place. Made sense. So, are you here to wipe my memory of everything that happened today? Paradox laughed. Wiping memories isn't quite that simple, dear Jen. Kevin I could wipe easily enough. Smart, but a simple concept of reality, not very flexible. Gwen would be more difficult, but still something I could do. Energy beings live in the present. But you are something entirely different. I don't know if I could wipe your mind if I tried. Paradox tilted his head at her. Jen turned and flicked on a lamp nearby. She looked up and Paradox was directly in front of her. There it is. I was wondering where it had gone. But it's right there. It must have happened when you looked into the event horizon. Paradox frowned. What did you see? Jen smiled at him. You already know what I saw. I know what you could have seen. 1,000,000 things you could have seen. If I try and wipe your memory of today depends entirely on what it was you saw. Jen nodded. When I looked into the event horizon, I saw eyes, 1,000,000 eyes, and I knew them all. Paradox frowned. That's not possible. The human mind doesn't have the capacity to remember that many beings. Even you couldn't. Jen smiled at him as she blew another bubble with her gum. Can't exactly forget something you see in the mirror every day, can you, Professor? Paradox blinked at her for a moment, then laughed long and loud. Oh, there's the Jen I know. Excellent. Jen blinked, and suddenly the professor was across the room. Well, I think we're done here, then. Jen turned to fully face him. Is it weird that it's comforting, knowing there are others out there? Paradox laughed again, though this one was much more contained than his last one. No, my dear, it's not. With that, Paradox vanished and did not appear again. Jen shook her head and stepped off to the kitchen to find something pleasant to eat.